My name is Mateo. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania where everyone knew everyone else's business were family. Names carried weight and where tradition was less a choice than an inheritance. Passed down like my grandfather's pocket. Watch that now sits in my dresser. Drawer our family the Williamson had. Lived in Oaked for 4 generations. My father Robert ran the local hardware store that his father had started, and my mother Eleanor taught English at the high school. We lived in a colonial-style house with blue shutters. On Maple Street, attended the Presbyterian church every Sunday and hosted the neighborhood 4th of July barbecue each year without fail. From the outside we were the picture of small-town American. Normally inside our home that normally was maintained through unspoken rules and expectations. My parents weren't overtly strict, but certain things were simply understood. Excellence was expected in school. Respect for elders was non-negotiable, and the future, at least in broad strokes, was predetermined. College, preferably Penn State, where both my parents had graduated, followed by a respectable career, marriage to a nice girl, and eventually children who would carry on the family name. I played along for most of my childhood and adolescence, not because I felt particularly oppressed, but because I hadn't yet recognized that the script written for me didn't match the one developing in my own heart. I was a good student, played baseball in the spring and football in the fall, and had a wide circle of friends, but there was always something, a disconnect, a secret discomfort that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't until my junior year of high school that the missing piece revealed itself in the form of Blake Henderson. He transferred to our school from Philadelphia in October, and from the moment he walked into AP Chemistry and took the empty seat beside me, something fundamental shifted in my universe. Blake was unlike anyone I'd known in Oaked. His father was a professor at a small liberal arts college nearby, and his mother was a sculptor whose work had been featured in galleries in New York and Chicago. He wore vintage band t-shirts under flannel button-downs, could quote Kurt Vonnegut and James Baldwin with equal ease, and played guitar in a way that made our music teacher actually weep. During a school talent show, he was brilliant and thoughtful, and so completely himself that it made the careful conformity of our town seemed suddenly stifling. We became friends almost immediately, bonding over a share of science fiction novels and indie music that none of our classmates had heard of. Blake introduced me to filmmakers and authors I'd never encountered, and I showed him the hidden spots in our town. The abandoned quarry where we could swim in summer, the fire tower with views across 3 counties, the diner that made the best milkshakes in the state, but was hidden on a back road. Tourists never found. My parents liked Blake well enough. At first, he was unfailingly polite to them, helped my mother clear the table after dinner without being asked, and engaged my father in conversations about classic cars that seemed to genuinely interest them both. But I could sense a weariness beneath their welcome, as if they recognized something in him, or perhaps in the way was around him, that unsettled them. He's very urban, isn't he? My mother remarked one evening after Blake had gone home. I suppose that's to be expected coming from Philadelphia. My father's assessment was more direct. Good kid, but a bit too sure of himself. That comes from never having roots anywhere. Family moves every few years, he told me. No sense of community in that kind of upbringing. What neither of them said, but what I felt hovering in the air between us, was their awareness that Blake represented a departure from the path they had envisioned for me. His influence was evident in small ways: the music I listened to, the books stacked on my nightstand, the questions I began asking in Sunday school that made our pastor sigh and my father's jaw tighten. They couldn't quite put their finger on the problem, but they sensed that something was changing. They were right, but not in the way they imagined. What was changing was my understanding of myself, the truth I had been circling for years, never quite able to face directly. Became impossible to ignore. The night Blake and I sat on the fire tower, watching meteors streak across the August sky. We had been talking about college plans. Blake wanted to study film at NYU, while I was dutifully considering engineering at Penn State. When our Conversation drifted to more personal territory. Have you ever dated anyone? Blake asked, his eyes still on the stars. You never mention girls, but half the cheerleading squad watches you. During football games, the question made my stomach clench with a familiar anxiety. I had gone on a couple of obligatory dates with girls from our class, even kissed Sarah Matthews after junior prom, but it had all felt like going through motions in a play I'd been cast in without auditioning. Not really, I admitted. Nothing serious. What about you? Blake was quiet for a moment. I dated someone for about 6 months back in Philly. It ended when we found out we were moving here. There was something in his tone, a careful neutrality that made me look at him more closely. You never said what her name was. Blake met my eyes then, and in the silvery moonlight I saw a vulnerability I'd never witnessed him before. His name was Eli, he said quietly. The world seemed to pause. Expanded contract. Oh, I managed, yeah. Blake looked away, back to the stars. I don't usually tell people here small towns aren't always the most welcoming places for guys like me, guys like you. I repeated, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain he could hear it. Gay guys, he clarified, though we both knew that wasn't necessary. I figured you might have guessed. I haven't exactly been subtle with my David Bowie obsession. Laughed, a nervous sound that didn't quite mask the earthquake happening inside me. I didn't know, or maybe I did, and just didn't let us think about it. Blake turned to me again, his expression careful. Does it bother you? No, I said, immediately, the word coming out more forcefully than I'd intended. No, it doesn't bother me at all. Something shifted in his gaze, a question forming. Mateo, he said softly, is there something you want to tell me? The moment stretched between us, infinite with possibility and terror. I had never said the words aloud, had barely allowed myself to think them in the privacy of my own mind, but here under a sky glittering with falling stars, with Blake looking at me with such gentle understanding, the truth rose to the surface. I think I started then, swallowed hard, and began again. I think I'm gay too. I've never said that to anyone before. Blake's smile was slow and warm, like the sun breaking through clouds. Thank you for telling me, he said simply. Then, after a moment, how long have you known? Forever maybe, but really recognized it probably since freshman year, maybe earlier. I ran a hand through my hair, a nervous habit, but here in this town with my family it just didn't seem like an option. He nodded, understanding. It's not easy anywhere, but especially not in places like this. Have you thought about what you'll do when you leave for college? I mean, the question startled me. I had been so focused on keeping my secret that I hadn't really contemplated a future where I didn't have to. I don't know, I admitted. I haven't let myself think that far ahead. Blake's hand found mine in the darkness, his fingers warm against my skin. Well, now you can with me. At least you don't have to pretend. That touch, innocent as it was, sent electricity through my entire body, and his words, the simple permission to be authentic, at least in this one relationship, felt like being handed a key to a door I hadn't dared approach. We stayed on the fire tower until past midnight, talking in a way we never had before. Blake told me about coming out too. His parents supportive, if a bit bewildered at first. His relationship with Eli intense, educational, ultimately bittersweet, and the freedom he'd found in accepting himself. I shared my fears about my family's reaction, the weight of their expectations, and the sense of isolation I'd carried for years. When we finally climbed down and walked back to where we'd parked our bikes, something had fundamentally changed between us. We weren't just friends anymore, we were confidence co-conspirators in a truth that felt both dangerous and exhilarating. Can I hug you? Blake asked as we prepared to go our separate ways. I nodded, not trusting my voice when his arms wrapped around me. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been, but had always been seeking. I hugged him back fiercely, allowing myself to hold on perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. As I biked home through the sleeping town, a strange lightness filled me. Despite the complexity of my situation, I had finally spoken my truth aloud, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt as though it might just be beginning. Over the following weeks, my friendship with Blake deepened into something more. It happened gradually, fingers brushing while passing notes in class, shoulders pressed together as we sat side by side watching movies in his basement. Late night texts that grew increasingly intimate. Our first kiss came on a rainy afternoon in October as we sat in his car after school, the windows fogged and the radio playing softly in the background. It was awkward and perfect, and terrifying and right all at once. We were careful, of course. In public we maintained the appearance of close friends and nothing more oaked high. School wasn't a place where two boys could hold hands in the hallway without consequences, but in private moments, Blake's room when his parents were out on drives to neighboring towns where no one knew us, during study sessions that involved very little actual studying, we explored this new dimension of our relationship with the intensity that only first love can inspire. At home, I became increasingly aware of the gap between who I truly was and who my parents believed me to be. Each family dinner felt like a performance, each conversation a careful navigation around the truth that was becoming more central to my identity. Every day I began to drop small tests into conversations, mentions of a gay character in a TV show, comments about a celebrity who had recently come out, watching carefully for my parents' reactions. The results weren't encouraging. My mother would purse her lips and change the subject. My father's responses ranged from dismissive "it's all for publicity" to actively disapproving, not the sort of lifestyle anyone should be promoting to young people. Once, when a news segment same-sex marriage came on while we were watching TV, he simply stood up and left the room. As winter turned to spring, the pressure of living this double life began to wear on me. Blake noticed, of course, one afternoon as we sat in our spot on the fire tower. He brought it up directly. "You seem stressed lately," he said, his hand resting lightly on my knee. "More than usual," I sighed, leaning back against the metal railing. "It's getting harder to keep everything separate, to be one person with you and another with them." Blake studied my face. "Have you thought about telling them, your parents, I mean?" The question sent a spike of anxiety through me. "All the time, but every scenario I imagine ends badly. You don't know that for sure," he pointed out gently. "Sometimes people can surprise you, not my family," I said with certainty. "You don't understand how deep this goes. It's not just about their personal opinions, it's about their standing in the community, the family reputation, generations of expectations. My grandfather used to say that a Williamson always does what's right, even when it's difficult." I laughed without humor. "Somehow I don't think this is what he had in mind." Blake was quiet for a moment. "What if you don't tell them yet? What if you wait until you've graduated, until you're at college and have some distance?" It was the sensible suggestion, the path of least resistance. But something in me rebelled against the idea of continuing this carried for months, possibly years. "I don't know if I can keep pretending that long. It's exhausting." And I hesitated, then forced myself to continue. "I don't want to hide us forever. I love you, Blake. I want to be able to love you openly someday." The words had slipped out without planning, but as soon as they were spoken, I knew they were true. Blake's eyes widened slightly, then softened. "I love you too," he said, his voice steady and sure, "and we will have that someday, I promise." We held each other as the sun began to set, painting the surrounding forest in gold and amber. In that moment, despite all the uncertainty ahead, I allowed myself to believe him. The decision to come out to my parents wasn't made in a single moment, but accumulated over weeks of increasing tension and small telling incidents. There was the dinner where my father pointedly asked if I was planning to ask any girls to the senior prom, the argument about college where my mother couldn't understand why I was suddenly considering art schools in New York instead of engineering at Penn State, the uncomfortable silence when Blake's name came up more and more frequently in my conversations. The breaking point came late April, just weeks before graduation. Blake and I had been careful, but not careful enough. Peterson, who lived across the street from the fire tower and whose nosiness was legendary in Oak Ridge, had spotted us there one evening. What exactly she saw, I was sure, perhaps just two boys sitting closer than friendship typically warranted, or maybe an embrace that couldn't be mistaken for anything else. Whatever it was enough for her to mention to my mother at their Book club meeting that I seemed awfully close to that Henderson. Boy, I came home from baseball practice to find my parents waiting in the living room, their faces grave in a way that immediately set alarm bells ringing in my head. Jack, my father said, his voice tight, we need to talk about your friendship with Blake. The conversation that followed was painful and circular. They didn't directly accuse me of anything specific, and I didn't explicitly confirm their suspicions. Instead, we danced around the subject with phrases like unhealthy attachment and negative influence, standing in for what none of us was willing to name. We think it would be best if you spent less time with him, my mother finally said. Focus on your other friends, on preparing for college. He is my friend, I said, my voice strained with the effort of controlling my emotions. My best friend. I'm not going to stop seeing him because Mrs. Peterson has nothing better to do than spy on teenagers. This isn't about Margaret Peterson, my father said sharply. This is about what's best for you, for your future. Something in his tone, the absolute certainty that he knew better than I did what was best for me, broke through the careful control I'd been maintaining. You don't know anything about what's best for me, I said, standing up from the couch. You don't even know who I am. My mother looked stricken. Jack, that's not fair. Were your parents then? Maybe it's time I told you the truth. The words were out before I could reconsider. Propelled by years of hiding and months of strain, I'm gay. Blake isn't a negative influence. He's my boyfriend and I love him. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's hand went to her throat, a gesture I'd seen her make in moments of extreme distress. My father's face had gone completely blank, a stillness more frightening than any anger would have been. You're confused, he finally said, each word precise and controlled. This is a phase brought on by that boy and his unconventional family. Once you're away from his influence, it's not a phase. I interrupted, my heart pounding but my voice steadier than expected. It's who I am. It's who I've always been. Long before I met Blake, he just helped me find the courage to accept it. My mother was crying now, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. Mateo, please think about what you're saying. Think about the family, about your future. I am thinking about my future, I insisted. For the first time, I'm actually thinking about what I want, not what you want for me. My father stood up, then his movement stiff. I think you should go to your room while your mother and I discuss this. We'll continue this conversation when everyone is calmer. It wasn't quite in order, but the expectation of obedience was clear. For a moment, I considered refusing, pushing the confrontation to its conclusion, but the emotional toll of the past hour had left me drained. I nodded curtly and left the room, climbing the stairs to my bedroom and closing the door behind me. I texted Blake immediately. They know, not sure what happens next. His response came seconds later. Are you okay? Do you need me to come get you? The offer was tempting, to simply walk out, get in Blake's car and leave behind the suffocating weight of expectations and disappointment, but running away wouldn't solve anything. I'm okay for now. We'll call you later. I spent the next few hours in a strange limbo, lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling, occasionally hearing muffled voices from downstairs, but unable to make out what was being said. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because I woke to a knock on my door. It was past midnight. My father stood in the hallway, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Can we talk? He asked, his voice rougher than usual. I nodded, sitting up and making room for him on the edge of the bed. He sat down heavily, keeping a careful distance between us. Your mother has gone to bed, he said. She needs time to process this. I nodded again, waiting. I want to tell you a story, my father continued, staring at his hands rather than at me. Something I've never told anyone, not even your mother. This was so unexpected that I could only listen as he began speaking, his voice low and measured. I was in college, not much older than you are now. I had a friend named Thomas. We met in a literature class sophomore year. He was studying to be an English teacher, like your mother ended up becoming. Actually, a ghost of a smile crossed his face. Thomas was brilliant, passion about books, about ideas. We started studying together, spending more and more time in each other's company. My father paused, and I could see him struggling with what came next. Our friendship became something more, at least for me, and I believed for him as well. We never It wasn't physical exactly, but there were moments of touch that lingered. Conversations that went deeper than friendship typically allows. I had never felt that way about anyone before. I sat completely still, hardly daring to breathe as my father continued his story. One night after we'd been studying late in his dorm room, I finally found the courage to tell him how I felt, and he didn't reject me outright. He admitted that he had feelings too that he'd been struggling with. Then my father's voice had grown quieter, more distant, as if he was seeing that moment rather than the bedroom where we sat for a few weeks. We explored what that might mean. It was all very innocent by today's standards, holding hands when no one could see, a few cautious kisses. But it felt like everything to me. I thought perhaps we had found something real, something that could last. He looked up, finally meeting my eyes. Then my father, your grandfather had a heart attack, not a severe one. He recovered fully, but it was serious enough that I went home for a couple of weeks. Being back in Oak Ridge, surrounded by family, by the weight of tradition and expectation, it changed something in me. I became acutely aware of what pursuing a relationship with Thomas would mean. The disappointment I would cause, the doors that would close for me, the life I would never have when I returned to college. Told Thomas we needed to end whatever was happening between us, that it had been a mistaken experiment, nothing more. I watched the light go out in his eyes as I said those words. It was, he faltered, it was the cruelest TV ever done. I couldn't speak, couldn't process the revelation that my father's solid, traditional, predictable Robert Williamson had once loved another man. After graduation, he continued, I came back to Oak Ridge, met your mother at a church picnic that summer. We married the following spring. Thomas sent a congratulatory card. I never responded. His voice had taken on a flat quality, as if reciting facts from a textbook. He went on to teach at a private school in Boston, published several well-regarded books of literary criticism, never married as far as I know. Dad, I finally managed. Why are you telling me this now? My father's eyes, when they met mine, held a grief so profound it took my breath away. Because I don't want you to make the same mistake I did, he said simply. Because living a lie, even a comfortable one, hollows you out over time in ways you can't imagine at your age. But you and Mom, I began, confused. You've always seemed happy. Are you saying your whole marriage has been a lie? He shook his head quickly. No, I love your mother deeply and truly, but there has always been a part of me that I've kept locked away, even from her, especially from her. A possibility I cut off before I could discover where it might have led. He reached out tentatively, placing a hand on my shoulder. What I'm trying to say, Mateo, is that I understand more than you could have known, and while your mother and I need time to adjust to this news, I don't want you to ever feel you have to deny who you are to please us or anyone else. Tears filled my eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. Of all the reactions I had anticipated, this profound connection had never been among them. I thought you'd be angry, I admitted. Disappointed. I'm scared for you, he corrected gently. The world is more accepting than it was in my day, but it's still not an easy path, and yes, I worry about what this means for the future we imagine for you. But disappointed, no, how could I be disappointed in you for having the courage I lacked at your age? We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his revelation settling between us. Does this mean, I hesitated, hardly daring to hope, does this mean you're okay with me and Blake? My father sighed heavily. I won't pretend it's simple, Mateo. Your mother and I were raised with certain beliefs, certain expectations. This will take adjustment for both of us, but we love you and we want you to be happy. A small, sad smile crossed his face. Real happiness, not the kind that comes from meeting others' expectations at the cost of your own truth. Relief washed through me, so powerful it made me lightheaded. Thank you, I whispered, not trusting myself to say more. My father stood, looking suddenly awkward and uncertain. Get some sleep, we'll talk more tomorrow. The three of us. Your mother needs time, but she loves you, remember that. As he turned to leave, I called after him, Dad, the friend you mentioned, Thomas, have you ever thought about contacting him just to see how he is? My father paused in the doorway, his back to me. Sometimes, he admitted quietly, but some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. Another lesson I Hope you never have to learn, he glanced back at me. Goodnight, son, goodnight, dad. After he left, I sat awake for a long time processing everything I had learned. My father's story had shifted the ground beneath my feet, recontextualizing everything I thought I knew about him, about my family, about the weight of secrets carried across decades. Eventually, I reached for my phone and texted Blake, "You won't believe what just happened. Can you meet tomorrow? After school, I have so much to tell you." The next few weeks were a period of careful adjustment in our household. True to my father's prediction, my mother needed more time to reconcile herself to the news. There were tears, difficult conversations, questions that revealed both her concern and her fundamental lack of understanding about what being gay meant, but she was trying in her way. And that meant more than I could express. My father, having shared his secret with me, seemed both burdened and lightened by the revelation. He didn't mention Thomas again, but I sometimes caught him watching me with Blake with an expression that mingled sadness and something like hope. He made efforts to include Blake in family activities, asking about his college plans, even attending the student film showcase, where Blake's short documentary received the highest honors. Graduation came and went. Blake and I both committed to schools in New York. He to NYU's film program as planned, me to Pratt Institute for Graphic Design, a significant departure from the engineering path my parents had expected, but one they now cautiously supported. The summer stretched before us, our last in Oak Ridge before everything would change. One evening in late July, my parents hosted a small graduation party for me in our backyard. Nothing elaborate, just family, a few close friends, and of course Blake. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, my father approached where Blake and I sat at the picnic table, hands casually entwined between us. "I have something for you both," he said, placing a small envelope on the table. "Consider it an early going away present." Blake and I exchanged curious glances before I picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside were 2 tickets to a Broadway show for late August, just before our classes would begin, along with a confirmation for 2 nights at a hotel in Manhattan. Dad, I breathed, stunned by the gesture. "This is thank you." My father smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes that had been increasingly present in recent weeks. "Your mother and I thought you might like to get settled in the city a bit early, expo together before the semester starts." Blake looked as surprised as I felt. "Thank you, Mr. Williamson. This is incredibly generous." My father nodded, his gaze moving between us with an expression I couldn't interpret. "You know," he said after a moment, "when I was young, I believed that life was a straight path laid out before us with clear signposts and destinations. Now I understand it's more like a forest with countless trails, some well-trodden, others barely visible until you're brave enough to take the first step." He placed a hand on my shoulder. Then, after a brief hesitation on Blake's, "As well, you two have found your trail. Follow it with courage and kindness for each other. That's all any parent can really hope for their child." With that, he turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Blake and me in a moment of stunned silence. "Your dad just give us his blessing," Blake whispered, squeezing my hand. "And a romantic getaway to New York," I laughed, joy bubbling up unexpectedly. "I think he did both, actually." Blake's smile was radiant in the gathering twilight. "Your father is full of surprises. You have no idea," I said, thinking of the secret my father had carried for decades, the path not taken that had shaped his life in ways visible only now in retrospect. As we sat there in the soft summer evening, the future stretching before us with all its uncertainty and promise, I felt a profound gratitude, not just for Blake and the love we had found, but for my father's unexpected understanding, born from his own unspoken history. His revelation had given me more than acceptance. It had given me a determination to live authentically that was strengthened by knowing the cost of the alternative. In a few weeks, Blake and I would leave for New York, beginning the next chapter of our lives together. There would be challenges ahead, certainly not everyone would accept us as readily as my parents were learning to do, but we would face those challenges together, walking a path that others like my father and the Thomas he had once loved had glimpsed but felt unable to Follow, my name is Mateo, and this is not just my story but a continuation of one that began long before me, a story of choices made and unmade, of courage found and lost and found again, passed down through generations like an inheritance, more valuable than any pocket watch or family name.